his resources to open up this place. And the location, as I said, was very good, because not only it was a short distance for him to bring in the oysters, but he could send them out via shipping, which was the least expensive way to transport things, and go all over the world if he wanted to, by means of the Chesapeake Bay and the Atlantic Ocean. Now, back in 1883, where did he get people to work in his cannery? Where would he get people to work?
Everywhere.
Raise your hand so I know who's talking. I heard somebody say something. No ideas? Yes.
People who live around there, everywhere.
Okay, people who lived in Baltimore needed work. And those workers, surprisingly enough, may have been, were our African American population. We had a large African American population. There were only certain jobs that they could get. And one of the jobs that they were able to get was that of oyster shucking. That is opening up the oysters and taking the meat out. Now, they were the only people he hired to do that job. It was segregated in his cannery. The other people that he hired weren't from here at all. Where did they come from? Yes.
So New York.
Well, it's possible, but I'm thinking about a little farther away.
Overseas.
Overseas. Do you have any idea from where? Europe. Southern and Eastern Europe. A lot of those people came over here. And at one time, our fort was directly across the river in Fells Point. Around 1850, it had grown to the point where they moved down. So when the time that we're talking about, 1883, it was at Locust Point, which is located behind what is now Domino Sugar. Now, Domino Sugar is the last heavy industry left in Baltimore. They work 24/7, all week long, every hour of the day. And they refine those little yellow sugar packets, and and it is cane sugar cane. Whereas, interestingly enough, when you go out west, you don't get sugar cane usually, it's beet sugar. But that comes in here and they work constantly refining the sugar. Now, in 1883, did the shoreline look the way it looks today? No. How do you think it was? Do we have anybody else in this class?
It was probably like bigger and like, longer and like probably like newer, because this looks kind of old. And it was probably like new with metal. I think it was bigger than that.
Well, first of all, do you think we had the high rise? These are million-dollar condominiums that built along here. Did we have things like that back in 1883? No, they would have been low-lying buildings. We did have people who lived over in Fells Point, but there would have been a lot of businesses. In fact, in 1883, there were 65 canneries in this area. By 1900, we had 100 canneries in this vicinity. So that was one of the major industries. It was the second largest industry in Baltimore. The garment industry was number one. More people worked in the garment industry than any other. The second largest number of people worked in the canneries. We canned all sorts of vegetables, as well as oysters. In fact, Mr. Platt, at that time, he only took oysters out of the Chesapeake Bay during the months with the letter R, cold months of the year. In the summer months, the cannery didn't shut down. They turned it into a fruit and vegetable cannery so that they were active all year long. The people who came here doing the other jobs in the cannery, as I said, were from Eastern and Southern Europe. They came for a variety of reasons. Anybody tell me some of the reasons that they came to America?
Better work to take, probably Spanish.
I know that, yeah, they had the potato famine in Ireland, but they were looking for better working conditions. They were probably looking for jobs, but what else? There were some other reasons.
Was there a war?
Political unrest, some reasons why they came. Yes.
For the form of government?
Okay. Yes.
Wait, what did you say?
Form of government.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not sure, but some people from Europe came to America to escape the power of the church in Europe and come to America to start Protestant churches.
Yes, a lot of people were looking for religious freedom. They were looking for a better life, and obviously they couldn't take a great deal with them. A lot of people came over on the Lloyd ship lines from Germany. A lot of people came from Ireland, all of those kinds of countries for a variety of reasons. Some people came following relatives who had come over ahead of them. And they came to Baltimore because Baltimore is the farthest west. Our port is farther west than any other port on the East Coast, which means to get from here out west, it was a lot shorter distance. And we had one big advantage, and Mr. Platt had it too, to transport his merchandise. We had the first chartered railroad in the United States. And it was the first one to reach the Ohio Valley. So they could get off of that ship, get on a train, and go west. Now, Mr. Platt took advantage of the fact that a lot of people came to Baltimore, and he would send his foreman over and offer them work because he needed people in his cannery. Do you think that he hired mostly skilled people or unskilled people for his company?
Unskilled.
Unskilled. What is the difference between a skilled job and an unskilled job? Yes.
Unskilled workers do not have to be trained on how to do it.
Okay. Yes.
You can pay people who are unskilled less.
You would definitely pay unskilled people less, but is that fair or not?
No.
We had that.
Isn't it fair if somebody has worked years and years and years to study for a job and practice for many years? Some people did apprenticeships, especially back in those days. They would be an apprentice for maybe 8 years or more before they could actually be skilled in their job. Shouldn't they get paid more than somebody that just comes in and sweeps the floor?
Yeah.
So it pays to have an education and to be able to take and do a job that requires a little bit more skill. So you're absolutely right. The difference between a skilled and unskilled job. One, for instance, the loaders brought in the oysters, carried them in and emptied them for the people to shuck the oysters. They were definitely not as skilled, considered a skilled job. 90% of the jobs in the cannery actually were unskilled. Now Mr. Platt had an unusual cannery in that they actually made cans as well as filled the cans. So he had a lot of things available. A lot of the geography, so to speak, or your ecology was a lot different back in 1883. First of all, we did have the water out here. But do you think this water was cleaner or dirtier back then?
Cleaner.
Dirtier? How many people think it was dirtier? How many people think it was cleaner? I think it's debatable because back then they didn't have trash collection the way they have now. There were many, many boats here. In fact, there were so many boats that you could get on the deck if the captain would allow you and go from boat to boat to boat and get all the way across the harbor without ever getting your feet wet. And the boats were different. Today we have a lot of boats moored out here, but they're all pleasure boats. They're all boats people use just for fun. Back then they were all work boats, and those people sometimes had cargo on their ships that spoiled, and they just tossed the trash overboard. Didn't care about that. Some of the people in Fells Point got rid of their garbage. We didn't have trash collection the way we do today either. And so they just dumped it in the river. They lived close by. Now, anything that we get on the sidewalks or the streets when it rains, we go into the river. And back then, did we have automobiles in 1883? No, there were no automobiles. And so people either walked, rode bicycles, or what did they use? Horses. They had horses to draw wagons, to pull carriages, to pull the streetcars on rails. They had horses that they just rode. There were thousands of horses in Baltimore. Horses aren't potty trained, are they? So all that manure that fell on the street would wash into the river. So it wasn't a very nice place. Now, in modern times, we still have a problem with all the tributaries. If you ever see painted on the storm drains, Chesapeake Bay drainage, that's exactly what it means. Anything that goes into those storm drains ends up in one of the tributaries. When we have a storm, you couldn't believe how much litter comes into this river. And unless they get it all scooped up, which they try to keep up with, it's going to go into the Chesapeake Bay, which causes all kinds of problems, including dead cities where nothing can live. So one of our other big problems, if you see the red rooftops over here, there's a whole area of flat land that has been cemented over. It's been capped over because Allied Chemical produced carcinogenic chromium. And they had to block that all off and won't allow anything to be built there. They're talking about possibly starting to build in that area now. But that was shut off. So we have other things in the water that aren't so good either. Okay. We're going to get started on the program. Mr. Ed, did I leave anything out? Okay.
Pardon me. Before you start, can I just address them for a second?
Certainly.
The presence of the Chesapeake Bay would be a situational factor because you'd be able to ship your canned goods out to area ports and overseas. Site-based factors would include labor and the presence of the Baltimore or the B&O Railroad, right, so that you can ship inland. So just keep in mind, when we're talking about the cannery, that's part of the reason of why it's here. Why, that's the why of where, the geographical aspect. And we were talking before about migration from Southern and Eastern Europe. A lot of you chose political issues, which was part of it. Economic opportunity because of overpopulation, right? So population pressures is what pushed people out, and also finding their ways to the ethnic enclaves, because every city where you had chains of migration, you had these little, like we're going to Little Italy this afternoon, so that's an example of.
We had a lot of those places around here, Polish area, Italian area, just about any
denomination you can think of where they would kind of.
I drove to Essex yesterday to pick a friend of mine up and take her to the airport, and I saw the most Irish-looking guy ever. He had a cap on the bulb of his nose, and ethnic enclaves.
So yeah, so that's in some ways it's unfortunate. I know they have the Lithuanians. It's not as prevalent now, but we still cling to our heritage. Okay, we're going to get started. There are a bunch of jobs that we have. One is making cans that we don't make out of a tin anymore because you kind of cut your hands. So we make cans, make sure we don't make any of these things. We don't want any periscopes or telescopes or drums, 2 bottoms and no top, because this is how you fill the oysters into the cans, through an opening at the top, and of course you need a solid bottom. We actually will be doing some printing, and there are 3 colors, your red, green, and black. So some of you will be printers, some of you will be shuckers. Oh, I did forget one thing though. We talked about the water being dirty, but the air was dirty because what did they use for fuel in most cases? Coal, and that gives off a black smoke with soot, comes down, particles, and gets all over the ground. We have real oyster shells, we do not have real oysters. So they're just a bead. And you use an oyster shucking knife to open it. It's not sharp, it's strong, to open it up. And that little black spot in here is where the oyster was attached. Some of you are going to be shuckers. There are fillers, people putting the oysters in the cans, the ones that put the labels on. Think about which ones are skilled jobs, which are unskilled. And we're going to get to work. We have, up here. We designate who you are by the tags that you wear around your neck. We're going to use the pink side first. It has your name and your job. It also tells something about you. The first one we have here is John Granger. He's a boss can maker. He's 36 years old. And he's the boss. He came from Scotland and lives in South Baltimore with his wife, 4 children, and 2 boarders, and he can read and write. Now, the boarders are people who rent a room in his house.